These were the latest images coming out of Ukraine, and to discuss the current military situation in the country, I am being joined here tonight by Jon Sweet, retired military intelligence officer. Good evening, sir. Delighted to have you with us, of course.
Good evening. Thanks for having me back on.
So, despite the most recent Russian attacks, I wanted to sort of start on a more positive note and take a closer look at the recent financial and military donations to Ukraine. Right, we have 61 billion from the U.S. We have 3 billion pledged by David Cameron from the U.K. So I wonder what will these financial injections, so to speak, translate into? What kind of military equipment will be bought, and sort of what is the plan here?
Sure. Right now, I believe the military equipment that's going to be coming in right now is primarily going to be used just to, as Mark Toffman and I would say, stop the bleeding. There's a lot of momentum built up on the Russian side, particularly on the ground forces. They continue to push west into the Donetsk area, and what they need is the weapon systems that can stop this and slow it down. That's primarily in the forms of artillery, but also air defense. So those are the systems right now that are most in need and need to get to the battlefront most quickly.
Right, so we already spoke about this a little bit, but I mean, it still continues, I believe, to be a valid question. David Cameron said that Ukraine can use the British equipment to attack territories inside of Russia. Do you think that this sort of signals a second phase of the war? What will this result in?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing a leadership within the United States, but within Great Britain and France too, that understands that the war can't just be fought on the battlefields in Ukraine. The war of interdiction has to occur. It has to take place. That Ukraine has to be able to slow down the flow of Russian troops and equipment that are coming in from Russia. Russia can't be afforded sanctuary in which to launch these attacks. Also, they also have to be able to go after those missile sites and drone sites that are being used to rain down terror upon Ukrainian civilian population centers. And the only way they're going to do that is with that extended range, the precision munitions that Storm Shadows, Scalp, and ATACMS provide to the Ukrainian military.
So you're a military intelligence expert. So let me ask about this sort of more technological aspect, or perhaps cyber aspect of intelligence. I've been told that the Russians have been attacking Ukrainian data, right? From the cyber perspective, cyber attacks were being conducted. So I wonder, how can Ukraine protect itself from such attacks, and are these common? What do we know about this in more detail?
Yeah, the cyber dimension of the battlefield obviously is very technical and very complicated. You have warriors that are driving mouses and keyboards versus actually launching munitions at one another. No, it's exceptionally important that Ukraine be able to defend their networks. Corrupt networks, or networks that are vulnerable to Russian cyber attacks, can affect the ability of munitions, guided munitions that rely upon computers to get the geo coordinates and deliver ordnance on station. So what they can't afford to have is for those networks to be corrupted and that information not be able to get through.
Right. So, I mean, is there anything that can be done? Perhaps some Western support on this front, if, of course, some of the Western countries are more experienced here, or perhaps have more resources.
Sure. No, there's enough that can be provided as far as cyber expertise. Remember, the Cyber Center of Excellence is located in Estonia for NATO, so there's a lot of capability as far as expertise and software applications and trained operators. It takes a long time to train a cyber operator. In the United States, just the basic training for an operator could take upwards to 22 weeks, and that doesn't include the extended training that they're going to need to stop the infiltration of their network. So it requires expertise. You just can't develop that overnight. It's got to be long term. So they'll need an infusion, and they can do some of this off station. They don't have to physically be in Ukraine to do the work.
Right, and you've mentioned Estonia, and I've heard that, I mean, some experts are saying that there is a shift within NATO, that countries such as the Baltic republics, right, or some of the former Soviet or satellite Soviet states such as Poland are taking the leadership here. Do you agree with that statement?
Well, I agree that they're stepping up, and they're stepping up for a good reason. It's because they have experienced the subjugation of Russian rule. And it's not just Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, but Finland, Poland, and other countries that used to be, within the Warsaw Pact. They understand the consequences of a Russian victory. It's much closer to them. It's much more current, and they'll do everything they can to not be subjugated to Russian rule again.
Right. So Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski has just visited the U.S. and he said that, regardless of who ends up being in power in America, Poland wants to preserve a good relationship with the U.S. Right. And I sort of wonder if there will be a change in the administration if Donald Trump, for instance, takes over. Do you think that there will be a change in American policy towards Ukraine?
That's a great question. Towards Ukraine, I'm not sure. I think in a political season, things are said, gestures are made, but at the end of the day, it's those advisors, the professionals, the military men and women in the Pentagon, in the State Department at Foggy Bottom, and the national security staff. Those are the ones that are advising the president, and the president makes decisions based upon information he's provided by those professionals. So talking to candidates and talking to presidents sometimes, there's two different perspectives, but I think the majority of the American people support the continued support to Ukraine, and I don't see how either administration can overlook that.
Okay, perfect. I mean, what I also wanted to ask about is, of course, the public opinion, right? Because the 60 billion that was stuck in Congress was partially stuck due to the public opinion, right? That was against, some of the people, of course, were against supporting Ukraine with such a significant financial donation. So as a military intelligence expert, do you think that there are things that can be done to sort of counter disinformation or perhaps to try and make this view of supporting Ukraine more popular in the US? What could happen on this front?
No, absolutely. And I think the one thing, the one weakness that the West has, and not just the United States, but throughout Europe too, is the information campaign. We don't do a very good job of putting out information on why we're doing something, what it's going to take to win. Whereas Russia has been very successful with their disinformation and causing division and divisiveness within political parties and within countries throughout NATO. I mean, so we need a strong information campaign. People need to understand what that money is going towards, why it's important. They need to understand the national security interest behind that. And clearly the security of Eastern Europe is paramount to Europe, but it's also important for the United States to have secure Europe too. So I think that has to weigh in. We have to do a better job of presenting information to the American public that counters what they're seeing in social media.
Right, and it's sort of, it bothers me because, of course, it is all ahead of the presidential elections which are coming up. And today I've heard Bernie Sanders speaking about the students' protests on American campuses, saying that this could be the Vietnam for President Biden. So, I wonder if perhaps, supporting Ukraine too much also could result in him alienating some of the support base and so on. So what is your take on that? How significant is this timing? And is it, helping or perhaps to the contrary, the Ukrainian cause?
Sure. No, I understand the question. I think winning at the end of the day clears everything up, takes all the doubt away from the namesayers who are questioning why we're doing something. And right now, what I think the bulk of the American people are seeing on their television screens is Ukrainian forces being pushed west, not east, and being pushed west by what many people, I guess, would say is a larger, and it is a larger Russian force that's coming at them. But it's not a more capable Russian force. It's a force of mass in humans and mass in artillery that can be defeated. And I think we just need to do a better job of getting those weapon systems to Ukraine and supporting them. But again, the message has to go to the United States and also to Europe that explains, why is this important? Why are we committing billions of dollars to an effort in Eastern Europe, and what are we going to get out of it? I mean, there's a lot of competing interests, but it has to be a national security interest that's delivered.
Right, to sort of perhaps show it also as an American matter, right? I mean, at least not putting American boots on the ground. That could be an argument. But sir, in terms of actual military equipment, I'm not an expert here, but what do you think are some of the key purchases or key things that need to, be in Ukraine right now?
I'll tell you, the first thing that they need, and what the Biden administration has finally come around to, is the deliverance of the ATACMS munitions. That's going to enable Ukraine to fight that war of interdiction, to slow down the flow of forces into Russia, so that they can deal with what's currently in Russia. They don't have to fight, the fight 2 to 3 days from now, because it would have been removed from the battlefield. It also puts Crimea into play, in which they can start making that the peninsula itself untenable for Russian forces that are present. The other thing that's missing that we should see in the May, June, July timeframe is the introduction of the F-16 fighter jets, which is going to provide some deep strike capability, but will also provide some close air support to the ground soldiers. Now, the other piece that's obviously missing is those 800,000 rounds that the Czech Republic and France have been working so diligently on to secure and to get those to the front lines. I think once we see those rounds start arriving, we'll start seeing things turn. But in order to win a war of maneuver, it's got to be a combined arms, and they're going to need tanks and armored personnel carriers, and they're going to significantly need engineering equipment, because don't think for a minute that as the Russians are progressing forward that they're not digging trenches in fighting positions behind them to hold that terrain. I mean, the Russian foreign minister has told us that they're trying to establish a sanitary zone between the two countries, and they only do that by holding terrain. And it's going to be hard to root them out. So those cluster munitions are going to be important too. But Ukraine needs maneuver space, and they can succeed in the maneuver world, but they have to be able to break out in those engineering types of equipment that allow them to get through those defensive fortifications and into the Russian rear. That's significant. So all those together is the long-term piece.
Right. I mean, much awaited equipment, much needed, but luckily now Ukraine has some funds to sort of go ahead with some of these purchases. Thank you so much for being with us and for your insight.
Hey, great. Thanks for having me back on.